All right. Thanks everybody for hopping on with us here today. Appreciate you taking the time, or if you're watching after the fact for press and play, and hopefully taking some time today to learn a little bit more about cloud security and how it should positively impact your business. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jesse Hill. I'm the president of Tier 3 IT Solutions, and I'm particularly pleased today to be joined by Roddy Bergeron from Sherweb. And we have an intro slide that we'll pop over to and have you introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure.
Before we do that, we do have a little bit of live content here. So, if you want to scan the QR code and participate, then we'll get a little bit of input from you all about kind of your perspectives on cybersecurity and cloud security and responsibility and all those types of things that will come into play a little bit later in the discussion. And as always, we are joined by Tin Mar, our sales operations analyst. She's monitoring our chat and our Q&A. So feel free to throw anything in there and we'll do our best to address that as we go. So with all of that groundwork laid, Roddy,
Yes.
feel free to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role and perspectives on the topic, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I'll give you the dime store tour of my life. So my name is Roddy Bergeron. I am the cybersecurity technical fellow at Sherweb. So my whole role is partner education. So I work with our different partners and our vendors and everyone else in our managed service provider ecosystem, helping them understand how to build better cybersecurity programs. So understanding it from a comprehensive and a practical standpoint. Spent my first formidable years out of college working for a CPA firm, doing audits of banks and hospitals and government entities. Spent 7.5, 8 years doing that work. Worked with a nonprofit in Louisiana doing some turnarounds with Department of Health and Hospitals for some developmental disability centers. Came over to the managed service space. Worked with an MSP here in Lafayette, Louisiana, building their managed service platform and their security services and their vCISO and their GRC platforms and services. And then came over to the Sherweb, where, like I said earlier, all I do is partner education. I don't sell anything. I'm not a salesperson. They literally put me on the product team, so I don't sell anything. I don't have sales quotas. So I work with anyone and help spread the good news of cybersecurity in the space. I know today the topic is going to be on cloud security and why it's important. And I can tell you from all my years working with vendors, right? Like the biggest security gaps we've always seen has been in cloud practices. Mainly because I think there's a lot of trust, and there should be a lot of trust with our cloud service providers, our SaaS applications, and our infrastructure platforms. But sometimes security gets overlooked because we have this inherent trust. So we still have to do some due diligence. We still have to do some hard work and overcome the challenges, especially with data forensics in the cloud, right?
Mhm.
Traditionally, whenever we were doing incident response at our MSP, right? We'd go in, we'd have a forensics team or whatever that would go in. If you can put hands on a hard drive and pull data off of it, it helps in the investigative process. But obviously, in cloud services, they're not going to let you into the data center and start pulling drives. So how do we improve security and how do we help with incident response in the cloud? And I think those two topics pretty much go hand in hand.
Yeah, and when Roddy and I prepped for our discussion today, we learned very quickly that our conversation today is going to be very dynamic and
Yeah.
is probably going to go way off course from the slide deck that we have prepared. And truth be told, I think that's one of the things that I hope is valuable and interesting to people today. We have a whole slide deck presentation around, why are we moving to clouds to, cloud computing? What are the benefits that people are seeing from it? And I think that rather than go through that structured presentation, we'll just point out a couple of key things. I'm going to go to the feedback slide and then let's talk about kind of our perspectives because you've already given me a couple of nuggets there that I could latch onto and talk about. But generally speaking, businesses are moving to the cloud, and the cloud is a wide-ranging, broad term. It could mean QuickBooks Online and Microsoft 365. It could mean virtual server infrastructure. It could mean, AI-based applications and databases and all kinds of different things. But the general idea is that businesses are going there to gain these three benefits. And the what Roddy was referring to is that a lot of organizations, they have this inherent trust in the cloud. And I think it's because it's been marketed that way,
Yep.
where they've always said the cloud is more scalable, more secure. And in certain senses, I agree with that, but I think you and I both see the other side of the coin, where we recognize that if an organization has really poor cybersecurity hygiene, on premise, they're likely going to transfer that into the cloud. Meaning, if you reuse the same password on every application and then you go into the cloud, well, guess what? The password is the key to get into the cloud. And you are potentially actually increasing your organization's risk by moving into that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Just a point, right? Like the first slide talked about why are we using cloud services and cloud applications, right? And it's because of the flexibility and the ease of use and the user experience, right? Like it's sometimes it's a lot easier, a lot more fluid, but it comes at a sacrifice sometimes to security. We saw, or I saw, whenever there was this initial bump, like it's pushed to the cloud, right? And everybody was rushing, 8, 9 years ago to cloud environments. Security kind of took like a back, I guess, like a backstage presence, uh, because it was new. Like you said, a lot of the vendors were saying like it's more secure, there's more availability there. To move all these workloads and realize that we were overexposing ourselves to new risks and we didn't quite understand what those risks were. That has since matured more. We have learned a lot more from other people's mistakes. But still, I can tell you, all my years working in MSP, as much security as we put in place, we did a lot of incident response for. Um, we did a lot of legal work, so we did a lot of work with attorneys and other law offices. So we got called into a lot of incidents that were non-clients of ours. I can tell you, it was the basics that always burn somebody. No MFA, no kind of logging in cloud services, no kind of response or incident response plan in place. Like it is always the basics that burn people. And this year I gave a talk at the beginning of the year and like, what do we see? What new security functions should we see in 2025 or whatever? And I'm like, I don't know why we're talking what's new when like a lot of businesses haven't mastered the basics yet. And it's true, like every year,
yeah,
we pull like the data breach report, right? The VBER, and it's the same stuff every year. It's phishing, it's lack of MFA, it's
yeah.
vulnerabilities in software, right? Like those three things completely and utterly have been the three main categories in the cause of incidents over the last at least 5, 6 years that I can remember. And like they ebb and flow, which one's doing worse each year, but like it's the same ones. And it's all just basic cyber hygiene.
And I'm always thinking in analogies, and to me, the reason that we're talking about what's new is because humans are conditioned to want the quick, the easy, the cheap, right? I mean, if we just, take a step back and think of ourselves as individuals, if we want to maximize our health and our enjoyment of life, well, we should eat well, exercise, sleep well, spend less time staring at screens, engage in good conversation and build friendships. And like all we know all of the things that we need to do to live healthy, fulfilled lives, but we want the easy way. And the
Yeah.
same thing with cybersecurity is that there is no such thing as a single solution that's going to solve this. And this particular slide, I would like your input on it, but I hear this all the time: is we ask clients, we ask prospects, what would happen to your business if you didn't have access to technology? And most often the word I hear is chaos.
Yeah.
And we can see most businesses say like they would come to a standstill. But yet when you go to them and say, well, okay, let's put in place these measures to protect you from this risk, we get that pushback. And
Yep.
you have a different perspective because you've worked in, industries that we don't have access to in Canada, but the healthcare one in particular, I would imagine is one that it's incredibly frustrating to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Healthcare. So we had a few, we didn't have a whole lot of healthcare clients, but we did work a lot of incidents involving healthcare businesses. So I tell you, in the US, we have HIPAA, right, which is supposed to govern all the security practices around health information. A lot of them aren't following it. They use a lot of technology in health nowadays. It helps with patient outcomes and quality of life improvements and everything else. But still, we would find incidents where whole doctor's offices were taken down, people's healthcare was affected. Data leaks constantly from, I mean, you name the insurance provider or the health provider in the US, I can guarantee you they probably had some data leakage or something, right? So we increasingly, right, are a technology-driven, um, workforce and technology-driven businesses. And a lot of times we see security as like a hindrance. It's a hurdle to getting the task done. And I think that's the magic where I think IT providers can work with business, say like, how do we make their security seamless, and how do we make it easy, and how do we, instead of looking at it as a cost, right? Because everything is a
Yeah.
cost. You hire a CPA for a reason, you hire your attorney for a reason, you hire your banker for a reason, right? Like there's all costs, but you see the business sense of it. Like businesses have to look at cybersecurity as a business like investment, and how
Hmm.
that protects things like reputation, bottom line dollars, etc. Like I think that's the business case, right, for security. It's not supposed to be a hindrance, or it's not supposed to be so much we're going to protect you from all the bad things, right? There is a business case for cybersecurity,
Yeah.
and there's 100% rationale behind looking at it as an investment to like protect bottom line dollars and reputation.
Well, you hit on so many things there, right? And I talk about all the time that if you think one of those old school scales, right, for weighing your gold, and you've got convenience on one side and security on the other, they are inverse, right? As security, increases, convenience goes down, right? So you talk there about they see it as a hindrance. Well, that's kind of the point is that, if I want to stop people from breaking into my home or my building, locks on the doors are part of what I have to do, and that is a hindrance to getting in. On the flip side, when we increase convenience, our security goes down, and that's where we're introducing, that risk that sometimes is not apparent until it's been exploited.
Yeah. I look at it kind of like the automobile industry too, right? You know, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, like when there's a big push for like making sure every car had seat belts, right? Like nowadays, the cars have backup cameras and sensors and like, you know, like what is it? Like swerve prevention, auto braking, like all these other different security features now. But like nobody really asked for these, but we're glad that they're there. And we know it drives the cost of a vehicle up. But I
Yeah.
can tell you, like, the ability, if you've ever ridden, like, so I got to drive or ride, I can't say drive, I get to ride in a self-driving car in Phoenix,
Mm.
right? And like, it's a very weird sensation, but it was one of the safest driving experiences I've ever had compared to all the Ubers I've taken over the years. Like I've had some white knuckle Uber rides before. Like those self-driving cars or have better have less accident rates.
Yeah.
They drive so much smoother, right? So many sensors and technology inside of them, that like I think within the next 10 to 15 years, right? Like my kids, right? I have an 11-year-old and 8-year-old. They might not want driver's licenses because like, with all this automation and security features on there, we'll probably have a lot safer roads with all the autonomous vehicles out there. But it's the same thing about security, right? We still put our seatbelts on, even if the robots are in control, you still put
Yeah.
your seatbelt on in there. Like you still have to do the basics. You still have to make sure all the traditional security is in there, but like all this new security, again, like I think it's a wonderful thing. But like as we're talking about, right, we move to cloud services, And, there's a whole lot of new security functions that become available to us, like so Office 365. You got Intune, you got conditional access policies, you got continuous evaluation policies, you've got end-to-end encryption services, etc. Like you get a whole new slew of security functions that are available to you, and it's up to you, like to adopt those, right,
Yeah.
and see how they fit into your business.
Well, and yeah, I use the auto industry all the time because you think about it, cars have been available to the masses for 100 years.
Hmm.
When we talk about this cloud security stuff, I mean, most businesses, they've had some cloud services for 10, 15 years, but a lot of businesses have made the big push in the last, 5 or less years.
Yep.
And so it is relatively new, which means, particularly at scale, um, a lot of businesses haven't experienced the risk yet. They haven't experienced an incident or, an accident or a crash. And so in Canada, you mentioned HIPAA down in the States, compliance requirements to operate in that industry. Canada doesn't seem to push as much on those regulations. I mean, we have them, but I don't think we have the same teeth behind them. And so where a lot of Canadian businesses are feeling compliance requirements, it's coming from their cyber insurance provider, telling them that they need to implement these security measures. And we're starting more and more to see it through their client and their customer relationships. Particularly if you're a vendor to a large, energy producer or something like that, they're putting requirements on you as a small business because they know that if you suffer a cyber incident, it's going to impact their production and their
Hmm.
business. And so we're starting to see more of those regulations and requirements come into play. But it does take time, for businesses to adopt that. And actually, here, this I think ties in perfectly with what we were just talking about, right? Is you know when we ask businesses to say, you know, how are you addressing the changes in cyber risk? Um, I'm actually surprised to see that a third of them say that they're routinely assessing their systems. Um, but also that implies that two-thirds of organizations are basically waiting until they have a problem.
Yeah. And that tracks. That tracks with like, Microsoft, email incidents, right? Business email compromises. The vast majority of them, like 60 to 70%, are because people aren't using MFA. They just have an email address and password. And, like you said, they're reusing passwords or they get phished or it's a commonly known password, etc. And they're just getting in. So like this kind of tracks a little bit with like just some of the like we talk about the basics, like who's following the basics, who's doing more advanced work, and who's just like flying by the seat of their pants and hoping something bad, like they just avoid the statistics, right, and become part of the people who never get touched. But I will say this too: there's a lot of people out there who don't know they're in an incident because they don't have the proper mechanics in
Mhm.
place or the proper tools in place to know whether or not they've had an incident. And I can tell you, like, I onboarded a client at our managed service provider one time, and the second we threw our EDR solution on there, like our SOC started getting hits. And
Wow.
yeah, they had their exchange, they had an on-prem exchange server, email server, and it had gotten compromised. And I mean, our logs went back 6 months, and that's as far as we could go back. We were like, from as far as we could go back 6 months, they had been compromised. So someone had been sitting on the network for a long time, and just they never knew. So it's one of those things. It's like, have you ever experienced an incident? And people say no, and I like to put a little asterisk and say, well, not that you know of, because a
Yeah.
lot of times attackers can stay dormant for years, or are currently maintaining access, and it's just lost in the noise. You don't have the right monitoring tools in place. So, yeah, it happens, right? So I'm glad to see a third of people are actively running through some kind of exercise and some kind of proactive approach to security. But I mean, we do need to see those numbers pump up a lot.
And of course, self-reporting. So,
Self-reporting, yeah.
people know that they may not even actually, fully grasp what we mean by that. that option, that selection, right? Because I
Well,
know
yeah.
even, when we chat with our clients and we ask them, questions about, do you have an acceptable use policy? Do you have an AI policy? Do you have a bring your own device policy? And, a lot of them are like, well, no, we just think that people know what they're supposed to do. And it's like, man, if you I again, going back to the cars, I use the analogy all the time. I say, if you showed up at the office tomorrow with your entire team and there was 10 new pickup trucks out front and 10 new laptops sitting in the boardroom, which of those assets do you have more clear policies and expectations and, all of that built around? And I think we can all agree and argue that it would be the trucks, because everybody knows there's laws we have to follow. We can't drink and drive. We can't use it for our camper. We can't use it to move our friend, and the thing is that if someone crashes a truck, you lose a truck. And it's unfortunate, and hopefully, the person's okay. But then we give them these laptops, and in most businesses, they just have free reign. They can install whatever they want, change settings, do whatever they want to do with it, share it with, their friends and their family if they really want to. And if something bad happens to that laptop, it can bring your entire organization to its knees.
Yeah.
So, they really need to, think about it, from that perspective, as well as, you know, how well does our team understand the risk?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like one of our attorney clients told me, because I was like, look, we're gonna put some common sense policies in place, right? BYOD, like bring your own device, acceptable use, system security plan, like written information security plans, like all this stuff. And I remember he looked at me and he was like, he said, with all due respect, common sense is neither sensible or common. And I
Yeah.
said, I appreciate it, but like, so like back to your point about policies, right? Like a business has to operate inside of these guardrails. So policies are your guardrails. Like think about driving down a road, one set of guardrails keeps you from driving off the cliff, and the other side keeps you from smashing into the side of the mountain, right? Like you can operate in between those lanes, right? And
Yeah.
be sensible in the approach, but you have to be able to set some hard guidelines and say this is absolutely not acceptable, and this is how we operate the business in a general sense. Without that, you're flying blind. Like
Yeah.
you'd be in piecemeal work, and it's never a good approach to security. It has to be a structured like methodology to how we tackle risk in the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, I've been thinking about it. This particular slide here, I think we've already hit on a bunch of these, but kind of got me thinking, and it's something that we've had to really think about in our business is when we are choosing a new cloud provider, how are we choosing that vendor? Um, you know, we have to look at it and ask them about their security posture, about how they're handling the data. Um, and you have to have those non-negotiables where, if it's a key cloud service that we're going to be using, and like, let's face it, there's still lots of them that don't offer multi-factor authentication or single sign-on or, policy enforcement. We have to really think to ourselves, is there a risk that we're willing to take, on behalf of our organization and all the clients and vendors and, partners that we serve,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
extension, right?
Yeah, you bring up a good point because it's one of the talks I'm working on right now. And it's kind of funny because I work for a vendor now in the MSP space. So I'm writing one on like, here's how you need to hold your vendors accountable to security measures, right? Because every single company you partner with, or every single vendor that you pick up, even if you're using like Office 365 or whatever, you have some line of business application that's in the cloud. You're taking on risk and you're taking on inherent risk from that company. Again, we go back to like, well, do we trust? I trust that this company is going to do right, but are you doing your due diligence around it? So like talking to them, because this is one of the things I used to do back whenever I used to audit banks, right? So when a bank would go to change their major like back end software, right, whatever it was, whether it was how they process wire fund transfers or whatever, right? All these different systems. When they went to change one, they had to go get three opinions from other banks who use that
Yeah.
software as part of their due diligence or their due care. And they had to run through this diligence questionnaire, like how do you patch? When's the last time you had a SOC audit? Can you produce a SOC 2 Type 2 report? And working through this checklist, right? And that's something I don't think we do a lot nowadays. Like we sign up for, or we start using like a Chat GPT or a Dropbox or whatever without any forethought of like how are they handling my data? What are they doing to secure it? What happens when something bad happens? Like
Yeah.
what's my route to get resolution on this? Who do I talk to? Like you're setting yourself up for a whole lot of liability there, and you may not be aware of it.
Well, and I think one thing you mentioned Dropbox there real quick, and to me, that's one of those big ones. We call it shadow IT,
Hmm.
where an employee is trying to use the systems that you've given them to do their role, and they get so frustrated that they come up with their own solution. And a lot of times, what we'll end up finding out and you've probably seen this when you're investigating an incident, is that the staff are using a service that has not been approved by the organization. And, in something like Dropbox, they might say, oh, yeah, I'm using it so that I can, work from home or when I'm at the cabin or, on the road, whatever. And they're dropping sensitive company information into a file sharing service that they don't have any visibility or control over.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the same thing. Same thing with AI, right? Your Chat GPTs, your Groks, and your Geminis, right? Like those are a lot of times non-corporate sanctioned AIs, and people are dropping sensitive data into it. We see it all the time, and they're inadvertently leaking sensitive data into these large language models, and they're popping up in other people's AI responses. So it's you start talking about corporate controls and data loss prevention and just and cloud security and to be able to lock down like third-party applications, right? There's a term and it sounds bad, but the previous slide said something about insider threats. Well, there's two types of insider threats, right? There's malicious ones, right? The ones who either have a grudge, right, and they want to get back at the company, so they steal data or whatever, or they sell data. There's a whole could give you a whole laundry list of talks I've heard where like people have caught individuals at their business selling data to other companies or nation states or whatever. But there's another term which is non-malicious insider threats, and these are your insiders who use things like Dropbox or USB drives or
yeah,
unsafe. Like they're not trying to be malicious in a way, but they're still doing those bad actions like leaking data inadvertently or losing company data by storing it in a Dropbox and then they leave, and
yeah,
then you're like, hey, where was that? Where's our 3-year plan that Tony was working on? And it's like I don't know. So you have no since you don't have those corporate controls in place, you've lost all that data, or they walk off with sensitive data. We used to see it all the time. People would leave and they had email on their phone,
yeah,
right? And they'd leave the company and there's no recourse for the company to claw back that email, right? So that sensitive company information or sensitive discussions that were going on, you just had to tell them like, can you please delete it? And if they didn't, they walked off with it and no telling what happened to that data afterwards.
yeah.
Understanding like I guess a little bit about the how data is used inside the organization, where it flows, and helping lock down some of those third-party apps.
Yeah, it reminds me of a manufacturing company that called us in years ago, and one of the gentlemen on their engineering team had left the organization, and he just took the USB drive that his last 5 years of design work was on. He had never stored it, the data on the server, and nobody had ever questioned it, validated it, and yeah, they had to start over.
Yeah.
It was a real nightmare for them.
Well,
Um, Looking at this one here, I don't believe that 64% of our respondents actually share that responsibility, because more often than not, and I'm sure you've run into this when we talk to business owners, and we say, hey, if you came in tomorrow and like you were in the middle of a cyber incident, who would take care of that? More often than not, the response is, well, our IT company, our IT department. And I think this is one of the things, and what you and I learned when we first talked, is that we both have this strong conviction that a cyber incident is a business problem, not a technology problem.
yep.
The
100%.
technology, the technology team has a role to play, but like it starts and ends. It includes operations and finance and legal and PR and customer service and HR. Like it is incredibly stressful on your team when clients and vendors are asking for information and they can't get it to them because there's this bad thing going on. So IT, of course, is going to do what they can to minimize the risk and remediate and recover. But we really do need business owners to, kind of, get their head above water and realize that this is a much bigger business problem and not just an IT issue.
Yeah, like incident response, right? So when we would declare an incident, because I never declared a breach, right? Like a breach is a
Yeah.
legal term.
Yeah.
We either had a lowercase I incident or we had an uppercase I incident, right? Uppercase I incident was the bad ones. That's what we'd say. Like the first thing I'd say is I'd tell my whole team, like, stop what you're doing. Because like a lot of times we get called in, servers down or something. That's the initial thing, right? And normally, you find out later they were hit with ransomware or some other debilitating attack. And so we declare an uppercase I incident, and I'd say, all right, everyone stop work. And I need to talk to the business owner or the business point of contact. And I'd say, all right, you need to call your attorney, you need to call your CPA, you need to call your provider, you need to call your if you have a marketing person or an HR person or whatever. Like, we need to get all of us in a room, and I'm going to tell you what happened, and then y'all have to take it from there because
Yeah.
Legal is going to say, all right, what contractual or regulatory requirements do we have to meet right now? Because you may have signed a contract with someone that says you need to disclose this within 24 to 72 hours or whatever the contract
Right.
terms are. Not even talking regulatory environments where, like, I know in the state of Louisiana, if it's an incident involving the state government, I have to report it to them within 72 hours if it affects their data or any government entity.
Yeah.
And you got to get your CPA in because, hey, how much money can we spend on this incident? How much money do we have in the bank, right? Or your banker, get them involved. You got to call your insurance agent because, like, if you have a cyber insurance policy and any kind of other policy, they're going to dictate how this incident's going to go, right? And once you hand it to them and they have to start making claims, they're going to call in their own forensics team. They may even call in their own IT team to come work the incident, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
your hands off. Any further work, right? If you decide you're gonna just do the work or whatever, could forge your insurance policy, and then you're gonna have a PR or marketing issue on your hands where you need to get some money in front of it to help like stem the public tide and be that center point to make sure the information is given out in a timely manner. So it's a very complex sometimes issue, and this isn't. I'm not talking like large enterprise companies. These were companies with 50 seats, like 50
Yeah.
employees or less, right? That we were working incidents and we're like, you're right, it's going to become a very complex issue very quickly. So like, but this has to be spelled out ahead of time, which where the shared responsibility piece comes in. And I think a lot of times people think they have a shared responsibility, but has that been spelled out in the contract or in terms of like I talk about RACI models all the time, right? Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed models, where like you put down exactly all the business processes and you say, all right, who's responsible for these? You start to spell them out. Because a lot of times a business will think their IT person is responsible for a lot of this, and there has been no
Mhm.
communication. Um, I've walked into many disaster recovery issues, especially with hurricanes in Louisiana, where like
Mhm.
no one's really talked about recovery time. Like we always assume, I'll be back up in a day or two, but if we have to go, if we have displaced workers, and we have to figure out how remote access is going to work with these now displaced workers, that could be a couple days, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 3 weeks of downtime, right?
Yeah.
So, whose responsibility was it for that? Was it responsible for of the IT person to make sure you were open 24 hours, or was it the responsibility of the business to say, here's our tolerable downtime. Here's how long we can be down before something bad happens to the business, right? Before we start losing money or the damage to the business becomes unrecoverable from, right? And then plan that out. So there is some shared responsibilities there, and I could tell you my discussions with a lot of IT providers out there is that there is an assumption of shared responsibility, but it's never really been formalized, and it's never been like talked through. Because again, disaster recovery, which I many stories between fires and floods and tornado damage and everything else that a lot of times that gets discussed who's responsible for what when the incident happens, and it becomes like a blame game, and it's never good position for a business to be in.
Was it Mike Tyson who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the
Till
face?
they get punched in the mouth. Everyone has a plan.
Yeah.
And look, it's true. It's true. I've seen so many plans crumble because it was well thought out on paper, but no one ever walked through and did like a tabletop exercise or did an incident response walkthrough to make
Well,
sure it
and
actually worked, you know?
that's why I wanted to bring it up. Again, we've been running some more of those for our clients and contacts, and I think back to just you mentioned your kids and their age. I've similar got kids in school, and like a couple times a year they do a fire drill, and it seems so kind of annoying to them sometimes, but you realize that if the first time they ever hear a fire drill is when the hallway is full of smoke and they can't go down a certain hallway because sprinklers are going off and whatever, like that is chaotic, and it's how people get hurt or worse.
Yeah.
And the same thing in the cyber side. If the first time you ever talk to your CPA and your lawyer and your insurance company about what would happen if is in an incident, well, guess what? That's going to be a much more disjointed, challenging, drawn out, expensive situation than those who
Yep.
have practiced it ahead of time. So we're
Yep.
we're both here telling you, run a cyber incident response simulation, and do it on a regular basis
Yeah.
around different scenarios so that you and your team actually understand what it means to have a shared responsibility, who's doing what and how.
Yeah. My favorite quote is you fight the way you train.
Yeah.
So if you don't train, when it comes down to it, it's going to be very chaotic, and you're not going to know what you're doing, and you're not going to know how to pivot from bad things that happen, right? Because we all have a plan, like you said, until step in that plan fails. So last year, um, I ran a tabletop exercise with a bunch of MSPs at a conference, and I kept throwing what we call injects in there, right? Where like this
Yep.
bad thing just happens, and I'm like, all right, roll the dice. We'll see if it we had a 20-sided dice, you roll it. You're like, all right, let's see if you actually can perform that task or not. And what happens when it fails, right? Because it's going to happen. You can be, all right, I know I can, I did some test restores and now I can restore my servers within a day or two. But what happens if you start a restore and it fails halfway through or errors out, or maybe the provider for your backups are affected by the same outage that
Yeah.
that's causing your outage right now,
A
et cetera,
storm
right? Like,
rolls through and you lose power for 3 hours.
we've seen whole MSPs get hit with ransomware where it's not only them, but their downward clients too. All their clients get hit with ransomware as well. Like, how do you pivot from that? When
Yeah.
all we know, it's a scary thing. It's like planning your own funeral sometimes, right? No one wants to plan their own funeral, but it's good to be prepared in the event that something bad happens. Um, yeah, I still run through them. I work with a fellow provider here in Lafayette. He has an online incident response game for IT providers, and like it gives you a very short time frame, like a minute and a half to make decisions. And like by
Yeah.
the end of it, like an hour into it, I'm sweating and I'm like so stressed out from it. But it helps you like understand like this is what it's like. It's stressful and like you have to make decisions and bad things happen. And there's going to be some, what we call casualties in it, right? Like there's going to be some things that just don't get restored. So you pivot and you say, what's the next thing we have to get done? Or what's the next, or even having a plan of like, what's most important for this business, right? Because if you have to do a
Well,
full recovery from a whole site or a whole, slew of services going down, what's more important and when? Is it the line of business? And I learned that from hospitals because you would think in a hospital system that like anything patient facing, like
hmm.
charts and machinery that operates on their network, so like X-ray machines, EKGs, etc. Like those would be priorities, and it's not. Their priority was their billing system, because if
Interesting.
if they didn't have if they got backlogged 3 to 5 days in billing, it was a financial disaster for that hospital because they
Wow.
operate so much cash flow going in and out, like Medicaid billing, Medicare billing, insurance billing, cash payments, etc., etc. Like they
Yeah.
have vendors to pay because they got vendors who need to come drop off supplies. So if
Yeah.
their billing system was like high priority, like we get billing up first, X-rays can come second, right? Like that was, so it really taught me like you can make assumptions about what's the most important, but
Yeah.
when it comes down to what the business really needs to survive, they're usually the ones that best capable of telling you what it is and understanding their own business workflows.
what I was going to say, and when you get the leadership group in a conference room and you run a simulation and say, okay, what is our top priority? Well, guess what? Ops, sales, finance, HR, legal, they're all going to have a different perspective on it. And it's going to depend on what the incident is and the scope and all that kind of stuff. And I am just, just aware of our time. I know
Yeah.
we're just about at the time that we had booked. I think we've gone through many of these things. I guess the point that I would make around, cloud security is, you know, as a consumer, a business that is using, cloud services, you really have to do a good job of understanding how you're selecting that vendor, what security options are available, how are you enforcing and managing those security options. Make sure that you have a process around regularly, reaching out, reviewing, participating in their forums and their recommendations. And understand that we go back to shared responsibility. They're providing a part of a service and a storage mechanism. You are the user of that. It is also your responsibility to ensure that your organization has good software or good security hygiene and practices and many of the things that we've already talked about here.
Yeah.
Roddy, do you have
Also,
any comment you want to make on this?
oh, for sure. Your terms of service with your cloud providers, a lot of them will say, make sure you back up your own data because we're not responsible for data recovery. There's a lot of them
Interesting.
out there. So you have to make sure that if you're using a service provider, um, are they responsible for backing up the data and making it available in the event of an accidental erasure of data? Do they have a time period, right? So let's say they say, all right, we only keep 30 days of backups. Well, maybe regulatory requirements say you have to keep data for 2 years. So now you have a regulatory issue. You have to figure out, can I back up data with a third-party service or with my current backup solution from that provider, or do I need to go search for another provider, another backup solution? The other thing is like, how do I recover from it? Because a lot of cloud infrastructure, cloud providers, they don't only provide you with the application, they provide you with
Yeah.
all the underlying infrastructure as well. So the hard drive space, the CPU cycles, the RAM usage, whatever. So how do I recreate that potentially in like let's say I could recreate that in another AWS instance or an Azure instance or whatever, so I can maybe limp along or use that service in a limited capacity until the full service comes up. Like those
Yeah.
are all conversations to have, but I can tell you, I always pick on Microsoft for this. I love Microsoft. We're a big Microsoft partner in Sherweb, but you dig into their terms of service and it tells you like, hey, we're not responsible. Even if we accidentally delete the data, if it's an
Yeah.
issue on our end, we are not responsible for making sure you back up your data. You are responsible for it. So understanding that, because that's going to be a huge hindrance with you when it comes down to disaster recovery.
Well, and I think it's just so much of our conversation, right? That whole topic leads into the next conversation that we could have, which is all about business continuity,
Yep.
right? I mean, you could do all of the right things and still end up without access to your information because the cloud provider is having an issue. So again, that good practice is to say, okay, well, if something goes wrong, and we don't have access to our technology for a day or 3 days or a week while they sort their stuff out because we have no control over that, what are you going to do? Do
Yeah.
you have alternate systems? Do you have alternate ways of communicating with your clients? Are there manual processes that you can use? Um, and it gets really tricky because, let's face it, as businesses today, we all depend so much on technology. And the likelihood of that occurring is relatively low, but it does happen.
Yep.
Every
Yeah.
single provider, again, you pick on, the Microsofts and the AWSs of the world, nobody has a 100% uptime guarantee. Every provider has a certain margin of error that their service will not be available during the year. Now, we all hope it's at 2 a.m. on a Sunday when nobody needs to be in there, but it can be at a time that's not of our choosing.
Yeah, and I think that's where again we go back to like vendor risk management, right? So you gotta say to your as part of your business, like, what are my what are my security requirements? What is like I will walk away from the table if you can't do this as a vendor. What are the ones that are like nice to have, and which features just aren't important to you, right? So again, we go back to like conditional access policies, being able to set restrictions on like when somebody can log in, what IP addresses they can log in, under what circumstances can they log in, under what
Yeah.
circumstances can I adjust their security level so they have to do more authentication. Like to me, that's important to me as a cybersecurity practitioner, but for a business, they may only want a subset of those features that are critical to their business. They may not want all of them. That's a there's no gold like there's no golden rule for all this, right? Like it's your business, you accept the risk, but you have to understand like what security features do I need from a vendor? How can I communicate that to them so maybe they can help me better understand how I can implement those security features? Because there are things like what they call CUECs or something. If you ever done a SOC audit, right? There's a it'll walk you through like what security controls do you have in place? And there's things called CUECs, which basically says like we can meet this control, but the client can partially meet this control if they do X, Y, and Z. So there are some things you could do from your own perspective to make sure that you secure data or you secure your systems, even if a vendor may not support those security functions that you want. Right? They can help you like meet you halfway there potentially.
Really, you kind of opened talking about, that investing in cybersecurity is an investment in your business and your competitive, success. And the truth is that when it comes to cybersecurity, you are competing against your peers. Cyber criminals, they are like every other criminal. They go after the easiest target that they can find. And so, it's not necessarily that you need to have every security, hole plugged and every control and protection in place. But what you want to do is you want to be in a better security position than your peers and the business community at large. Um, and kind of going back to the feedback here again, I'd be surprised that 35% talk about their cyber risk regularly. But even if it is, again, that implies that 60 65% are not regularly talking about cybersecurity and business continuity and those types of things. And so, we'd go and we'd encourage that as we already have. And I think we'll just close, because this is the new world is AI,
Yeah.
and AI is that double-edged sword where on one hand we're seeing vendors being able to consume security related logs and information and identify risks and automate responses to that. But on the flip side, the cyber criminals are also using AI to, more rapidly, find vulnerabilities, exploit them, extend their reach into an organization. And so, it's kind of a tricky thing that we want the good guys to really leverage this, but of course the other guys are having similar access to these tools.
Yeah. Yeah, I do a talk on AI security and I always tell people like the genie's out of the bottle and we're not going back. Like AI is here, it's becoming
Yeah.
more available. I've seen all the different malicious tools out there that attackers are using with AI. And we just have to be prepared for it. It's okay to be I like to use the word afraid. Like you don't have to be afraid of AI, but you do have to be cautious. And I think that's a term that we need to start using. Like be cautious about your adoption of AI, but just know that you may not think that your company is using AI. Somebody in your company is using
Yeah.
a chat GPT or one of the millions of flavors of GPTs out there. And you have data leakage and you have individuals who are you know, using it for deep fakes. We saw what the North Korea's been doing with deep fakes to infiltrate businesses. I mean, like it's out there, and we have to do a better job of protecting ourselves around it. I watched a video of a guy with like zero technical experience go from having nothing to building a ransomware network in 20 minutes using some of the models out there and ransomware as a service models out there. So a guy knew nothing like
Yeah.
zero and said, all right, well, I'm not going to name the name of the the GPT service he used, because there's a bunch of them on the dark web, but like use that to create the code and to create all the backend infrastructure, and then use the ransomware as a service platform to start his campaign. And he was hitting people within 20 minutes. So like
Wow.
it's quick, it's easy. We have to be aware of all the threats, right? And I'll tell you, most of the threats aren't from outside individuals. It's from inside individuals using AI services and inadvertently leaking data or inadvertently leaking credentials into service. I mean, I see, and just from the technical piece, right? People put their username and passwords into public AI services. They put private encryption keys or API keys that should
My
never be
goodness.
public into it, and you should see the stuff that people find inside and out of it. So, um, it's definitely bouncing. It's a tool like anything else. It's a hammer. It could be used to build a home, or it could be used to bludgeon a skull, right? Like it's both sides of the coin that we have to be aware of. But people need to be aware of it. Like I always tell businesses, your first step, if you're gonna adopt AI, is you got to tell yourself, or you got to work through all your business use cases and say, all right, how are we going to use it, and then start putting your guardrails up around those use cases, and say, all
Yeah.
right, let's be iterative. Let's have if a IT steering committee, if you want to form an AI steering committee to say what's working, what's not working, how do we make it better, what's coming down the pipeline, what kind of return on investment am I getting by using AI, like just to make sure it makes sense for you, and then putting up some constraints around it so that people aren't either A, abusing it, or B, unintentionally using it and unintentionally leaking data. Because I've seen some instances where people have emailed sensitive data uh, using AI
Yeah.
without knowing it. So,
Well, I think the challenge, that I've seen is that, we talk to businesses that say, no, we're not using AI. We're going to avoid this risk by just not using it. And, to your point, people are using
yeah.
it.
What I
It's
mean, I,
just so easy for them to, pop into, any of them and say, hey, here's an email chain that I'm having with one of my clients or vendors, and I don't know how I should respond. And boom, it gives them a really thoughtful, creative way to address it that they might not have thought of. Well, guess what? It's just trained that user that when it has a question about how to interact in a certain way, you just drop information in, ask it a question, and you get a response. And that's the beauty of it. But,
yeah.
if those people don't understand what they've just put in there and what they've shared, that's where, it can cause problems as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at so like Firefox just announced, so the Mozilla Firefox browser, they just announced that they're dumping Google as their main search engine, and they're going with Perplexity, which is kind of like a
Mhm.
broker for different AI. So like
Yeah.
it'll do a search and it'll go search multiple AI models and say, all right, which one
Hmm.
gives me the best results, and spit it back to you. So, and eventually within a month or two, I think it's become like the main search engine. So again, you may not think you're using AI, but
Yeah.
if you're using Firefox in the near future, that's just another example. But this is going to be the continued trend. It's going to be AI is going to be embedded in everything. You won't be able to do anything on the internet without interacting with AI. Even if you think, you're interacting with a person via like a chat bot, like more
Mm.
than likely, so that's an AI bot that's feeding into a large language model somewhere. It could be a private one, could be a public one. You don't know. But like you're using AI right now. I guarantee you are using AI right now. You just don't know you're using it.
We are recording and transcribing and preparing this.
Using,
We're
yep,
This is going to get put into an AI video editing tool that's going to take it and snip it and caption it, and like and again, that's the thing, is that if your business understands the um, power of AI, and you design those use cases like you talked about, it is a massive advantage.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And those businesses who, people are always afraid that like AI is going to take my job, and it's like, no, your job's going to be taken by somebody who understands how to use AI, right? Like
yeah.
that's where we're going. And we look at even the further, right? Like I think Microsoft, like so we talk about agentic AI too, right? So the ability to create micro AI bots that just do one task, right? So traditionally, when we think about AI, it's an interactive service. I ask an AI bot or an AI chat a question, or I say do some research into this or whatever, and it performs the action. Well, the next level is agentic AI, where I say, okay, monitor my I don't know, inbox. And
Hmm.
if you read something that seems urgent, ping me about it so that I can make sure I give that high priority, right? So
Yeah.
like it's AI that does not wait on you to tell it something, it's actively doing an action. And like so Microsoft says like only 1% of companies right now or 2% of companies are using agentic AI, but that's going to explode in the next few years. So like think about all the micro tasks you do, all the little human functions you do to determine tone in an email,
Yeah.
or how do I respond to this, or like if a contract comes in from this vendor, read it and look for changes in language based on the previous contract, whatever, and you tell it just to sit there, and it's going to sit there and sit there and sit there until an action comes across it that it believes hits that rule, and it'll start performing those actions. So think about all those users and all the actions someone could create. And like there's people right now who have created hundreds of AI agents that just do that one little task for them
Yep.
and make their day a little bit better. So yeah, like that's a and it's again, it's not to scare anyone, but like this is where business have to focus on is how they address those uses of AI and how they help protect not only their business but their their clients as well in this new world, I guess, you know.
Well, and I'll just close here and say, it's one of the things that I appreciate about our partnership with Sherweb is that you guys do have kind of the visibility and the foresight into what's coming down on these tools. I've attended some of your live conferences as well as webinars and learned a lot about this. And the more we learn about it, the more we realize we don't know as much as we think we should, and that we are truly are at the infancy stage of these technologies. And so I think Roddy and we could probably go on for days on this stuff. But I do want to just say thank you for taking the time to hop on with us and
Yep.
share all your insight today. Hope for those of who attended or who are watching this, you found it interesting and valuable. And hopefully we can do something again in the future. So thanks again for your time, Roddy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.